Hello everyone. Today I want to show a wonderful game played in 1930 between Alexander Alekhine uh, and Aron Nimzowitsch, both very famous players of that era. And we'll see a very well-known uh, positional setup in the end of the game, and you'll know what I mean. Let's check out the game. So it starts with e4, e6, d4, and d5. The French is on the board. Knight c3 and bishop b4. The Winawer and the advanced variation of Winawer with e5. c5 striking in the center and bishop d2. Knight e7, knight to b5, bishop takes d2 and queen takes d2. And we'll notice one thing, that white has exchanged the dark square bishop, which would be a bad bishop generally because all the central pawns for white would be on dark squares. So to some extent that's an achievement. Black castles, not allowing knight d6 to come with check. c3 strengthening the center. d c5 was also possible. That's an interesting idea. Knight d7 to capture the pawn in f4. Knight into c5, knight d4. This also is perfectly okay. But after c3, b6 was played, strengthening the c5 pawn in one way, but it's not the most accurate way of going for it. f6 could be fine. Black is already castled. Want to undermine the central influence and the major pawn structure for white, and the dark square bishops have already been exchanged. E takes f6 would be forced, and rook takes f6. Now d takes c5, let's say, and knight d7. This could be a reasonable way of playing, and you do temporarily defend the pawn with b4, but then b6 is fine. The f file is open for black, and white is not castled yet. White has to develop the kingside pieces as well. So let's say c into b6, queen into b6 gives quite a lot of play for black here. This would be the way to go. Probably a modern player would choose this approach. b6 was played, and now f4, strengthening the e5 square. Bishop a6, knight f3 developing, queen d7, putting pressure on the knight, but a4, not moving back and allowing black to get rid of that potentially bad light square French bishop, and knight b to c6. Of course, that knight wants to come deep into white's camp, but b4 immediately, stopping any knight a5 and knight hopping ideas. Here it was possible to play c4, then allow knight d6 and then bishop b7, but the bishop would be a bit bad in that sense, and bishop e2, and white is quite good here. The knight is well placed, and white should be slightly better. There could be ideas of f6 as well. That would also be quite reasonable for black. C takes b4 is not the most accurate way of playing, though. It allows c takes d4. Now, well, both sides will get a semi-open c file, and it depends on who can challenge. And bishop into b5 probably is the best way to go, because after bishop into b5 capturing, you have a6, bishop d3, and rook fc8, and black definitely is not ceding control of the open c file, so it's fine. Maybe a slight advantage for white. The light square bishop is quite well placed, but it's okay. But bishop b7 was played, and the bishop is really not doing much. It'll just stare at the d5 pawn. Knight d6, maintaining tension on the bishop, but we don't want to capture that bishop anyway. f5 here, a bit provocative, but well, the center is closed, so it's okay. Not the best, but it's okay. a5. So the idea is to even further restrict black with on the queen side by pushing your pawns as far as you can and cramping black even more. Knight c8, trying to exchange that very strong knight on d6, but knight into b7, interestingly enough. The reason is that you want to, after queen into b7, you have a6, and you want to cramp black, and that's why you give up that wonderful knight which had to move anyway for that bad bishop. Queen f7 and bishop b5. Well, knight h to e7, defending the c6 knight, and now white castles finally on the 19th move. h6, preventing any knight g5 hopping. Rook f to c1. And if we just evaluate the position, black is a bit cramped. White's pieces are slightly more active, and white has a lot more space to maneuver. Rook f8, defending the knight. Rook c2. And of course, it's very obvious that white is planning to double up on the c file and put more pressure there. Queen to e8, defending the knight, preparing in advance of what would happen. There could be a way to play this with knight d8, just getting out of the way, trying to exchange some pieces, which is quite principled when you are cramped, because it's easier to maneuver fewer pieces in a cramped space than it is to maneuver more pieces. And maybe rook ac1 would come, and then rook queen to f8 could be played. You would not cede control of the c file by exchanging, and of course both the rook on c8 is defended twice. If, for instance, bishop d7 were played, putting pressure, then rook into c2 and queen into c2 and knight g6 would be very good for black. So there is no way to force the issue to gain control of the c file for white. So knight d8 really could be a way to go. But queen e8 was played instead, and rook ac1, and this is the start of putting pressure down the c file. Rook a3 could also have been played. That is also possible if you wanted a rook come to c3 and then put the queen on c1. That could also be one way to achieve it. And we'll see that happen in a way. You'll know what I mean very shortly. But rook ac1 and rook ab8, just making a move. Queen e3 now. Maybe the queen can go to a4 and put more pressure on the knight on c6. Rook to c7, finally thinking that I also need to double up. Rook c3. Queen to d7. Rook 1 to c2. King to f8. Now the king will come and defend on come to d8 in fact, and defend on the c file. Queen to c1, and this is known as the Alekhine's gun. It can be very powerful, and if especially you are able to pin a piece because of the sheer pressure of capturing if that piece moves. So like we see, if the knight on c6 moves, rook into c7 is a terrible threat. Rook bc8, putting some defense, or rather adding to the defense. Will it be sufficient? We'll see. Bishop to a4. The threat is clear. b5. b5 for black, trying to buy some time. Bishop takes b5 and king e8, trying to bring some defense on for the c7 rook now. Bishop a4, again the threat is b5, and after king d8, you could go for b5 right away, but Alekhine probably was in a whimsical mood and he played h4, just making a move and asking Nimzowitsch, what are you going to do? Well, Nimzowitsch resigned here because there is nothing to be done. If, let's say, you move queen e8, just making a move and trying to hold on, you have b5. What is going to happen? And we can in fact even show it that if after king d8 you had gone for b5 immediately, you would be forced to move that knight, let's say to knight b4, attacking the rook, and you have rook into c7. And after the rook captures, there is b6. There is an attack on the rook. B into c7 with check is threatened, and also there's a threat on the queen from the bishop on a4. So after queen into a4, you would have rook into c7 in fact, which is even stronger. And then you'll see why, that let's say after queen a6, trying to prevent a pawn storm on the and pawn promotions on the queen side, you have rook into e7, which allows, after king into e7, you have queen c7 check, and the pawn is going to go through if black is not careful. King e8 and b7, you will be forced to play something like knight c6 here, and there are two ways of dealing with it. You can simply, in fact I think the cleanest is probably queen into c6, because it diverts the queen and you will get a queen on the next move and you're up a piece. That's completely winning. So after king to d8 and h4, Nimzowitsch resigned. So this setup is quite famous and known as the Alekhine's gun. That's why I wanted to show this game. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.